I still remember the sound of that knock. 3 soft taps on my apartment door, on a rainy Tuesday evening, just 11 days before my wedding. If I had known what was waiting on the other side of that door, I would have never opened it. But I did. And in that one moment, my entire life, the life I had planned, the life I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, came crashing down like glass hitting a marble floor. My name is Emily. I was 29 years old, and I was the happiest I had ever been. I was engaged to a man named Daniel. Kind eyes, warm smile. The kind of man who remembered how I liked my coffee and never forgot an anniversary. Everyone told me I was lucky. My mother cried happy tears when he proposed. My best friend said we were relationship goals. And I believed them. I believed all of it. But that knock on the door was about to teach me something I never wanted to learn. That the people who smile at you the widest can sometimes be hiding the darkest secrets. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of them lying to you never even crossed your mind? Have you ever loved someone so much that you ignored the tiny voice in your head whispering that something wasn't right? If you have, then you already know how this story is going to hurt. But stay with me, because this isn't just a story about betrayal. This is a story about how a woman who lost everything she thought she had found something even more powerful in the wreckage. Herself. Let's go back a little. Let me show you how it all began, so you can understand exactly how deep this deception went, and exactly how far one woman had to fall before she learned how to rise. I met Daniel almost 3 years before that knock on my door. It was at a friend's birthday dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. He was sitting across the table, laughing at something someone said, and I remember thinking, this man has kind eyes. That's the thing I noticed first. Kind eyes. We talked for nearly 2 hours that night, long after everyone else had left the table. He told me about his job in logistics, about how he traveled often for work, about how he grew up in a small town 3 hours away and moved to the city for better opportunities. He told me he wasn't married, had no kids, and was tired of dating people who weren't serious about building a real future. I remember going home that night and telling my roommate, I think I just met someone different. And for 2.5 years, everything felt different, in the best way. He was attentive. He called every single night, even when he was traveling for work. He met my parents within the first 6 months, and my father, a man who rarely approved of anyone, actually liked him. He remembered my sister's birthday. He helped me move apartments twice. He sent flowers to my office just because it was a Wednesday. When he got down on one knee on a beach at sunset, surrounded by candles he had set up himself, I didn't hesitate for even a second. I said yes before he even finished the question. We started planning our wedding almost immediately. A small ceremony, close family, a beautiful garden venue just outside the city. I picked out my dress. My mother helped me choose flowers. We sent out invitations. Everything was falling into place exactly the way I had imagined it since I was a young girl dreaming about my future husband. But here's the thing about deception, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with warning signs flashing in red. It hides in the small things. The phone calls he took in another room. The business trips that seemed to happen a little too often. The way he sometimes went quiet for a few hours and later said his phone had died. At the time, I didn't think twice about any of it. Why would I? I trusted him completely. I had built my entire future around this man, around this relationship, around this idea of forever. But 11 days before our wedding, everything I believed to be true was about to be shattered by a stranger standing on my doorstep, holding something in her arms that would change my life forever. Let me take you back further, so you truly understand the world I was living in before that door opened. Daniel and I had built what looked, from the outside, like a perfect relationship. We had joint plans for our future, a house we were saving for, a honeymoon itinerary to Italy that we had mapped out together, even names we had jokingly picked out for children we hoped to have one day. He worked as a regional operations manager for a logistics company, which meant he traveled for about 1 week out of every month. At first, this seemed completely normal. Lots of people travel for work. He always called when he landed, sent pictures from his hotel room, and came back with small gifts. A scarf from one city, chocolate from another. Looking back now, I realize how easy it was for him to build an entire second life during those trips. But at the time, I saw none of it. I saw a hard-working man building a future with me. My friends adored him. At every dinner party, every holiday gathering, He was the one cracking jokes, refilling everyone's glasses, making my parents laugh with his stories. My mother once told me, "Emily, you found a good one. Don't let him go." I didn't plan to. I loved him with the kind of certainty that made me stop looking at other options entirely. I turned down a job opportunity in another city because I didn't want to be far from him. I introduced him to my entire extended family at my cousin's wedding, proudly telling everyone, "This is my fiancé." We moved in together about a year before the wedding. Sharing a home with him felt natural. His shoes by the door, his coffee mug in the sink, the way he hummed while cooking breakfast on Sunday mornings. It felt like the life I had always wanted was finally within reach. There were small moments, though, that I brushed aside without a second thought. Once, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket from a children's clothing store. When I asked about it, he said it was a gift for his sister's kid. I believed him, why wouldn't I? Another time, his phone buzzed with a text while he was in the shower, and I caught a glimpse of a name I didn't recognize before the screen went dark. When I mentioned it later, he said it was just a coworker. I let it go. Looking back, these were not isolated incidents. They were small cracks in a wall that I refused to examine too closely, because examining them meant admitting that something might be wrong. And I didn't want anything to be wrong. I wanted the fairy tale. As the wedding date approached, the excitement in my life reached its peak. My mother and I spent weekends trying on dresses and comparing flower arrangements. My best friend Sarah was planning my bridal shower. Daniel seemed just as excited, picking out his suit, helping choose the wedding playlist, laughing about how nervous he'd be walking down the aisle. But there was one thing I noticed in those final weeks that I couldn't quite explain. Daniel began taking phone calls outside, even late at night. He said it was work-related, a big client, an urgent shipment issue. He seemed stressed, distracted, checking his phone constantly. I asked him if everything was okay, and he'd smile that familiar smile and say, "Just work stuff. Don't worry about it, love." And because I trusted him with my whole heart, I didn't worry. I had no idea that the life I thought was solid, the life I had built my entire future around, was standing on a foundation made of secrets. I had no idea that somewhere else in this city, another woman was raising 2 young children, believing that their father was simply away for work during the exact same weeks Daniel was supposedly traveling for his job. I had no idea that the man I was about to marry already had a family. That knock on my door, 11 days before my wedding, was about to introduce me to a truth so devastating that it would take every ounce of strength I had just to remain standing. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact week things started to shift, even if I couldn't name it at the time. It was about 6 weeks before the wedding. Daniel came home from a business trip acting strange, quieter than usual, distracted, checking his phone every few minutes like he was waiting for something. When I asked if everything was all right, he brushed it off with a tired smile and said work was just overwhelming. I chose to believe him, because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You tell yourself that stress from work explains distant behavior. You tell yourself that a marriage built on nearly 3 years of trust doesn't crumble over a few strange weeks. I still remember the sound of that knock. 3 soft taps on my apartment door, on a rainy Tuesday evening, just 11 days before my wedding. If I had known what was waiting on the other side of that door, I would have never opened it. But I did. And in that one moment, my entire life, the life I had planned, the life I had dreamed about since I was a little girl, came crashing down like glass hitting a marble floor. My name is Emily. I was 29 years old, and I was the happiest I had ever been. I was engaged to a man named Daniel. Kind eyes, warm smile. The kind of man who remembered how I liked my coffee and never forgot an anniversary. Everyone told me I was lucky. My mother cried happy tears when he proposed. My best friend said we were relationship goals. And I believed them. I believed all of it. But that knock on the door was about to teach me something I never wanted to learn. That the people who smile at you the widest can sometimes be hiding the darkest secrets. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that the thought of them lying to you never even crossed your mind? Have you ever loved someone so much that you ignored the tiny voice in your head whispering that something wasn't right? If you have, then you already know how this story is going to hurt. But stay with me, because this isn't just a story about betrayal. This is a story about how a woman who lost everything she thought she had found something even more powerful in the wreckage. Herself. Let's go back a little. Let me show you how it all began, so you can understand exactly how deep this deception went, and exactly how far one woman had to fall before she learned how to rise. I met Daniel almost 3 years before that knock on my door. It was at a friend's birthday dinner at a small Italian restaurant downtown. He was sitting across the table, laughing at something someone said, and I remember thinking, this man has kind eyes. That's the thing I noticed first. Kind eyes. We talked for nearly 2 hours that night, long after everyone else had left the table. He told me about his job in logistics, about how he traveled often for work, about how he grew up in a small town 3 hours away and moved to the city for better opportunities. He told me he wasn't married, had no kids, and was tired of dating people who weren't serious about building a real future. I remember going home that night and telling my roommate, I think I just met someone different. And for 2.5 years, everything felt different, in the best way. He was attentive. He called every single night, even when he was traveling for work. He met my parents within the first 6 months, and my father, a man who rarely approved of anyone, actually liked him. He remembered my sister's birthday. He helped me move apartments twice. He sent flowers to my office just because it was a Wednesday. I remember every detail with painful clarity. The sound of rain hitting the window, the smell of the dinner I was cooking, the sight of my wedding dress hanging on the closet door where I could see it from the kitchen. When I opened the door, a woman stood there, soaked from the rain, holding a small child on her hip. She looked exhausted, nervous, and something else, something I would later recognize as heartbreak that mirrored my own, just from a different angle of the same lie. Are you Emily? She asked, her voice trembling. I nodded, confused, my mind racing to understand who this stranger could be. My name is Rachel, she said. I think we need to talk about Daniel. In that moment, my entire body went cold. I invited her in, my hands shaking as I closed the door behind her, my mind screaming with 1,000 questions I didn't yet have words for. What she told me next shattered every single thing I believed about my life. Rachel and Daniel had been together for 6 years. They had a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. They lived in that city 3 hours away, the same city Daniel supposedly visited for work trips. Rachel believed Daniel worked long hours and traveled frequently for his job, coming home to her and their children for 1 to 2 weeks each month. She had found our wedding invitation by accident, tucked inside a jacket pocket she was cleaning out. Confused and suspicious, she had done some digging, found my social media, found photos of Daniel and me together, engaged, planning a life she never knew existed. She sat in my living room that evening, showing me photos on her phone. Daniel at birthday parties, Daniel holding a newborn baby, Daniel at a family gathering, smiling the exact same warm smile he gave me every single day. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. Every memory, every promise, every plan suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. He told me he was engaged to someone for work networking purposes, Rachel said quietly, her voice breaking. He said it was complicated, that he'd explain everything eventually. I believed him because I love him, and because we have children together. I didn't know it was this real. I didn't know there was an actual wedding planned. 2 women, 1 man, 2 completely separate lives, running in parallel for years, each of us believing we were his only future. I don't remember exactly what I said to her that night. I remember crying. I remember feeling angry, humiliated, and completely lost, all at the same time. I remember looking at her little boy, sleeping peacefully in her arms, completely unaware that his existence had just detonated a bomb in my life. Rachel and I sat together for nearly 3 hours that night, comparing dates, comparing stories, slowly piecing together the map of Daniel's double life. The business trips lined up perfectly with the weeks he spent with her and their children. The random, unexplained phone calls, the second phone, the strange comment from his mother about him being good with children. Every single unanswered question from the past 3 years suddenly made horrifying sense. Daniel wasn't building one life. He was managing 2. And both of us, 2 women who trusted him completely, had no idea the other existed. When Daniel came home later that night, expecting to find me cooking dinner and talking about wedding details, he found Rachel sitting on my couch instead, their 2-year-old son asleep in her arms. I will never forget the look on his face. It wasn't shock. It was something worse. It was the look of a man who had been caught, not the look of a man who was surprised by an impossible situation. Somewhere deep down, Some part of him had always known this day would come. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat, his eyes moving between Rachel, their son, and me. "Emily," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "Explain what, Daniel?" I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of grief and fury I had never felt before. "Explain that you have a family? A whole family, living 3 hours away, that you never once mentioned in 3 years." He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, looking smaller than I had ever seen him look before. Rachel spoke first, her voice steady despite the tears running down her face. "You told me you were traveling for work every time you came here. You told me she was just a friend from your office when I found the picture on your phone last year. You've been lying to both of us." Daniel finally stepped inside, closing the door behind him, and for the next hour, the truth came pouring out, slowly, painfully, piece by piece, like a wound being reopened again and again. He had met Rachel almost 8 years earlier, before he ever met me. They had built a life together, a home, 2 children. But somewhere along the way, he said he felt trapped, wanted something new. And that's when he met me at that dinner party 3 years ago. Instead of ending things with Rachel, he had simply added me to his life, like a second job he could balance on the side. He told me he traveled for work when he was really going home to his family. He told Rachel he was networking or handling client relationships when he was really spending time building a future with me. He had proposed to me on that beach at sunset, fully knowing he already had 2 children with another woman he had never legally married but had built an entire life with. "I didn't know how to stop it," he said, tears finally falling from his eyes. "Every time I tried to end things with one of you, I couldn't go through with it. I told myself I'd figure it out eventually, that I'd find the right time to explain everything." I stared at him, searching his face for some sign of the man I thought I had loved for 3 years. But all I saw now was a stranger, someone who had lied to my face every single day, who had let me plan an entire wedding, invite my family, buy a dress, dream about a future that was never real. "There was never a right time, Daniel," I said quietly, "because the truth was never something you were planning to tell either of us. You were planning to marry me while still living a double life with Rachel and your children. You were going to let me walk down that aisle without ever knowing the truth." He didn't deny it, and that silence told me everything I needed to know. Rachel stood up slowly, gathering her sleeping son into her arms more securely. "I came here because I needed to know if this was real," she said, looking at me instead of Daniel. "And now I do. I'm sorry you got dragged into this the same way I did." Something strange happened in that moment. Instead of feeling anger toward Rachel, I felt something closer to solidarity. We were both victims of the same lie, both manipulated by the same carefully constructed deception. She wasn't my enemy. Daniel was. That night, after Rachel left, Daniel tried to explain himself further, tried to convince me that his feelings for me were real, that even though he had lied about his other family, what he felt for me wasn't a lie. I remember looking at him and asking one simple question. "If Rachel hadn't shown up tonight, were you still going to marry me in 11 days? He didn't answer, and in that silence, I found the last piece of clarity I needed. I told him to leave. I told him to take his things and never come back. And for the first time in 3 years, I closed the door on Daniel, not out of confusion or hurt, but out of a strength I didn't know I had. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my entire life. I had to call my mother and explain why the wedding was canceled 11 days before it was supposed to happen. I had to call vendors, cancel bookings, return the dress I had fallen in love with the moment I tried it on. Every phone call felt like tearing open the same wound again and again. My mother cried on the phone when I told her. My father, a man I had rarely seen show anger, said he wanted to personally speak to Daniel, though I asked him not to. This wasn't a battle I wanted fought with confrontation. It was a battle I needed to survive with my own strength. Sarah, my best friend, came over that same night and simply sat with me on the couch for hours, not saying much, just being present. Sometimes the people who love us the most know that words can't fix a wound this deep. Sometimes all we need is someone who refuses to let us fall completely. The following weeks were a blur of grief, anger, and disbelief. I went through every stage you might expect, crying uncontrollably some nights, feeling numb and empty on others, and occasionally exploding with a rage I didn't recognize in myself. I deleted every photo of Daniel from my phone. I packed away the engagement ring in a box I couldn't bring myself to look at. I returned to my childhood habit of writing in a journal, trying to make sense of 3 years that had suddenly become unrecognizable to me. Interestingly, Rachel and I stayed in contact during this time. What started as an exchange of painful information slowly became something unexpected, an understanding, even a strange kind of friendship. We were both trying to rebuild our lives after discovering the same devastating truth. We compared notes, supported each other through legal questions, and eventually, we both decided to speak with a lawyer about the financial and legal implications of what Daniel had done. It turned out Daniel had used money that was meant for our shared wedding savings account to also support expenses for Rachel and their children, without either of us knowing the full financial picture of what he was doing behind the scenes. Untangling those finances took months, but Rachel and I worked through it together, refusing to let Daniel's manipulation control our futures any further. I remember one night, about a month after everything fell apart, sitting alone in my apartment and having a realization that changed everything for me. I had spent 3 years building my identity around being Daniel's partner, his fiancée, his future wife. I had turned down opportunities, delayed dreams, and shaped my entire life around a relationship that was never what I believed it to be. For the first time in years, I asked myself, who am I, outside of being someone's partner? That question became the beginning of my rebuilding process. I started small, reconnecting with hobbies I had abandoned, spending more time with friends I had drifted from, focusing energy back into my career. I applied for that job opportunity in another city that I had once turned down for Daniel's sake, and to my surprise, the position was still open. Slowly, painfully, but steadily, I began rebuilding myself, not around another person's expectations, but around my own values, my own goals, my own definition of happiness. I didn't seek revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't try to publicly humiliate Daniel or destroy his reputation out of anger. Instead, I chose something that turned out to be far more powerful. I chose the truth, and I chose to walk away, stronger than I had ever been before. While I was focused on rebuilding my own life, the consequences of Daniel's choices were catching up to him in ways he never anticipated. Word travels fast, especially in close social circles. Mutual friends who had once admired Daniel's charm slowly learned the truth about his double life. Family members who had welcomed him at gatherings began distancing themselves once the full story came out. His own parents, who I later learned had suspected something for years but never spoken up, were left dealing with the fallout of years of silence. Rachel made the difficult decision to formally establish paternity and pursue proper legal support for their 2 children, ensuring their future was financially protected regardless of what happened with Daniel moving forward. This meant Daniel now faced serious legal and financial obligations that he could no longer avoid or hide from. At his workplace, the situation became complicated as well. Colleagues who had covered for his frequent unexplained absences over the years began questioning the pattern once rumors started circulating. Whether or not this directly affected his job, I heard through mutual acquaintances that his professional reputation took a serious hit, with several colleagues choosing to distance themselves from him entirely. I want to be clear about something important here. I never actively tried to destroy Daniel's life. I never spread rumors, never tried to publicly shame him, never sought out ways to make his life harder. The consequences he faced were entirely the result of his own choices catching up to him, a natural outcome of years spent building a foundation on lies. There's a certain kind of justice in that. When someone spends years constructing an elaborate deception, eventually the walls they've built start collapsing under their own weight, without anyone needing to push them down. About 4 months after that night, I heard that Daniel had reached out to Rachel, trying to rebuild some version of a relationship for the sake of their children. Rachel, understandably cautious after everything that happened, agreed to co-parent, but made it clear that any romantic relationship between them was over. She had also found her own strength in the aftermath, choosing to prioritize her children's stability over any lingering feelings she might have once had for him. As for me, Daniel reached out several times in those first few months, sending messages asking for forgiveness, trying to explain himself further, even showing up outside my workplace once, hoping to talk. Each time, I made the same choice. I did not respond. I did not engage. I did not give him the opportunity to manipulate his way back into my life with more charm, more excuses, more carefully constructed explanations. The most powerful thing I learned during this period was that silence and distance can sometimes be more powerful than any confrontation. Daniel had spent years relying on his ability to explain away suspicious behavior, to charm his way out of uncomfortable questions. By refusing to engage with him at all, I took away the one tool he had always used to control every situation. I changed my phone number eventually, not out of fear, but out of a desire to fully close that chapter of my life. I threw myself into my new job, in a new city, surrounded by new people who knew nothing about my past relationship, giving me the freedom to rebuild my identity without the weight of everyone's pity or curiosity. 6 months after that devastating night, I received a message from Rachel, letting me know that she and the children were doing well, that she had started her own small business from home, and that she wanted to thank me for how I had handled everything with grace, despite the pain we had both endured. That message meant more to me than I can fully explain. It was proof that even in the wreckage of Daniel's lies, something good had survived. Two women who could have easily turned against each other in anger had instead found mutual understanding and respect. A year after that rainy Tuesday night, I sat in my new apartment in a new city, looking out over a skyline I never imagined would become my home, and I realized something profound. I was happy, not in the way I had been happy with Daniel, built on illusions and half-truths, but a deeper, more solid happiness, one built entirely on my own foundation. I had taken that job opportunity one once turned down. I had moved to a new city, 3 hours away from every memory of my old life. I had rebuilt my social circle, made new friends who knew me only as the strong, independent woman I had become, not as Daniel's fiancée or the woman whose wedding fell apart. I threw myself into my career with a passion I hadn't felt in years, eventually earning a promotion I never would have pursued had I still been shaping my life around someone else's plans. I traveled to places I had always wanted to see, sometimes alone, sometimes with new friends, finally free to make choices based entirely on what I wanted, rather than what fit into someone else's double life. I started therapy about 2 months after everything happened, and it was one of the best decisions I made during that entire period. Talking through the betrayal with a professional helped me understand that what happened wasn't a reflection of my worth or my judgment. Daniel was a skilled manipulator who had successfully deceived multiple people for years. His ability to lie convincingly wasn't a reflection of my inability to see the truth. It was a reflection of just how carefully constructed his deception truly was. I also learned something important about the small warning signs I had brushed aside over the years. The second phone, the strange comments, the unexplained trips. I learned that trusting your intuition doesn't mean becoming suspicious of everyone you love. It means learning to honor that quiet inner voice when something genuinely feels off, rather than convincing yourself that love means ignoring red flags. Looking back now, I don't view myself as a victim in this story. I view myself as someone who survived a devastating betrayal and chose, deliberately and consciously, to become stronger because of it, rather than broken by it. I never sought revenge against Daniel in any dramatic or destructive way. I didn't need to. The truth itself was powerful enough. His own choices created every consequence he faced. My only role in that process was refusing to protect his secret any longer and refusing to let his lies define the rest of my life. The most meaningful transformation wasn't about Daniel at all, in the end. It was about me. About learning that I was capable of rebuilding my entire life from nothing, that I could walk away from the future I thought I wanted and build something even better in its place. I eventually met someone new, almost a year and a half after that night. It happened slowly, naturally, without any rush or desperation to fill a void. This time, I paid attention to the small things. How consistent someone's stories remained over time, how they treated the people around them, how comfortable they were being fully transparent about their life, their past, their daily routines. Trust, I learned, isn't something you give blindly. It's something you build slowly, with someone who consistently proves, through their actions over time, that they deserve it. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to leave you with the lessons I carry from this experience. Lessons I believe can help anyone who has ever trusted someone completely. only to discover that trust was misplaced. The first lesson is this: love should never require you to ignore your own instincts. If something feels off, even in the smallest way, it deserves your attention. Trusting someone doesn't mean silencing the quiet voice inside you that notices inconsistencies. It means listening to that voice while still choosing to communicate openly, rather than dismissing your own perception simply because you're afraid of what the truth might reveal. The second lesson is that betrayal, no matter how devastating, does not define your worth. What Daniel did reflected his own choices, his own character, his own willingness to deceive multiple people for years. It said nothing about my value as a person, my judgment, or my ability to build a healthy, honest relationship in the future. The third lesson is about the power of walking away with grace, rather than seeking destructive revenge. I could have spent my energy trying to publicly humiliate Daniel, trying to make his life as difficult as possible out of anger and hurt. Instead, I chose to focus that energy on rebuilding my own life. And in doing so, I found something far more satisfying than any act of revenge could have provided: genuine peace, and a stronger version of myself than I had ever been before. The fourth lesson is about the unexpected connections that can form even in the wreckage of betrayal. Rachel and I could have easily become enemies, blaming each other for a situation neither of us created. Instead, we chose understanding over anger, solidarity over division. That choice taught me that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to choose compassion, even toward people who share our pain from a different angle. And the final lesson, perhaps the most important one, is this: sometimes the life we think we want isn't actually the life meant for us. I spent 3 years planning a future with a man who was living a complete lie. That future, as painful as it was to lose, was never real to begin with. What felt like devastating loss in that moment eventually opened the door to a life far more authentic, far more aligned with who I truly was, than anything I had planned with Daniel. If you are currently going through something similar, if you've discovered a betrayal that has shattered the future you thought you were building, I want you to know that what feels like the end of your world right now can become the beginning of a stronger, more honest chapter of your life. It won't happen overnight. Healing takes time, patience, and often the support of people who love you unconditionally. But on the other side of that pain, there is a version of yourself waiting to be discovered, a version that is wiser, stronger, and far more capable than you ever realized. I walked away from that relationship with nothing but broken plans and a shattered sense of trust. But I walked into my new life with something far more valuable: a clear understanding of my own strength, and a promise to myself that I would never again mistake charm for honesty or attention for genuine love. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, if you've ever experienced a betrayal that forced you to rebuild your life from the ground up, know that you are not alone, and know that on the other side of that pain, there is strength waiting for you too.